Hey, we're here and we're back, and we're here to discuss leadership and the medical field and AI and business strategy and who knows what else with Mr. Jim Carlough. And he is an accomplished business strategist, speaker, and author. He has successfully driven explosive growth for healthcare organizations from startups to industry leaders. Mr. Jim is a trusted expert in building high-performing teams, revitalizing underperforming businesses, and guiding organizations through transformational change. And it comes from this core philosophy that leaders are not born, they're developed. And Jim even illustrates this, outlines, guides us through all this in his amazing book, which is called The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, A Roadmap to Success. So we are here to talk with Mr. Jim about this learnable leadership skill, about integrity, about humor, and so much more. We'll see what happens. We'll see what comes up. Mr. Jim, glad to be speaking with you.
I am so happy to be here, Robert. I've been waiting for this day to come, and I am glad it's here.
Ooh, well, the feeling is mutual, and I'm always looking to tap into more of the optimism. I think that when I was younger, I dreaded a lot of things, and that's no way to live life, right? When you say, well, there's appointments coming up or podcasts, or I have to be somewhere, and we should instead be enthusiastic, excited, optimistic, positive about what we have coming up. And so I'm always looking to tap into some of that energy and to help us understand what you're all about this, the inspiring change you put in people. What did I leave out in that bio? What currently has you just so passionate, focused, excited?
I think what has me most passionate is in mentoring people over the last 25 years, I came to the realization that there were unique characteristics that was common amongst all of them. And so about a year and a half ago, I started making a list of all of those characteristics, and I had about 15 of them. And I said, wow, that's an awful lot of characteristics to try to teach somebody overnight or in a book. And so I worked really hard to narrow it down to things that were implementable, things that people could resonate with, and things that I found most managers and leaders struggling with. And those became the key 6 pillars in the book and what I typically speak about today.
Well, great, and that's an amazing formula, right? It's like a Think and Grow Rich, where they say there's things like a burning desire or specialized knowledge, and you say, well, what did everyone do right? What are those overlaps, those commonalities? And then you ran it through this filter then and said, well, instead of overloading you with all these things like 15 bullet points, by the time you get to number 9, you're just going to be a puddle on the floor, and you say, hey, well, instead, let's reconfigure and say, where are people still stuck? Because you could always retread all the good to great sort of stuff, but you say, hey, here's where people are still missing the mark. So as far as these pillars that you've landed on, where is the hurt these days? Despite all of this leadership training and emotional intelligence and all this stuff, where are people still missing the mark?
I think where people are missing the mark are really in the interpersonal relationship skill areas. If you look at my pillars, most of them are things people probably know, but they don't know that they need them. Take compassion and empathy. I think in the workplace today, we're lacking in the compassion department and also in the empathy department. I think leaders today are very, very smart business people, but I don't think they've spent the time to really understand and learn the human aspects of the things that they're dealing with their employees and their teams. And those are some of the things that I focus on in my own journey as a leader and things that I do in my everyday life.
And that's the good stuff right there, right? The transformation to say, hey, I used to not have this figured out, and I made life a lot more difficult than it had to be, and it was an uphill battle, and I was so confused, and there was conflict, and there wasn't a reason for that. And so as far as this journey that you've been on here, Mr. Jim, like what has that been like? Like what did you realize needed to change within yourself?
So one of the first awakenings I had was back in 1983. It was the year I graduated college. I also ran that year for city government in the town I grew up in. I ran for the city council, and I happened to win. And a few days after the election, the city manager asked me to come in and visit with him. So I went in and I sat down, and he said, look, he said, congratulations. You did a great job. You're going to be a great councilman. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm going to give you one question that I want you to ask yourself. And he said, every night when you go to bed, before you close your eyes and put your head on the pillow, I want you to ask yourself one question. And that question is, did I do anything today at the expense of another individual, organization, or group of people for my own self benefit at their expense? And if you can answer that question with no, you've had a successful day. I ask myself that question still today, every night. So for me, that was an awakening on integrity. You have to run, and for me, integrity is the key pillar and the foundation for everything else. If you are a leader and you lack integrity, your team is not going to trust you. Your team is not going to be a follower. It's going to be very difficult for you to implement your vision or your strategy because they'll always be questioning it. So for me, it's always being consistent and being the integrity level very high and never wavering from that. And I think that is one key principle that I unfortunately have seen in leaders during my career. Thankfully, it's not many leaders, but I have seen that in my own career. And so that is something that I instill in people, and that is something that I say is non negotiable.
And unfortunately, it's so common, especially in politics. It's become such a cliche, right? Especially in local politics, you operate with this default setting, and you say, "Oh yeah, my local town, it's the rich boys club, and they get away with all kinds of stuff, and it'll never change. What's even the point?" And so it's great to have those better ideals. And I've noticed this pattern lately with a lot of these like leadership type of guys is they have these keywords, right? These definitions, these values that they always stick to. And they say, well, hey, if you were to unpack this leadership concept, there's all these things to it. But just to kind of have the ease of reference, you say, hey, well, here's what we believe in. And so we believe in this sort of integrity. And so how do we stick to it? It's one thing to say, well, here, like we'll be have integrity and we'll make sure to not railroad anyone and we'll live every single day without going with the expense of anyone else. But sometimes life is hard, right? Sometimes you talk yourself into things, you make compromises. And so is it difficult to keep this habit up, or have you seen other people kind of self-sabotage when it comes to integrity and leadership?
I've seen people struggle with it. It's one thing to practice it. It's another thing to internalize it and live it every day. And that for some people can be a very very difficult challenge. But if you can master it, it will open a huge number of doors. I have been very blessed in my life and in my career and have accomplished a lot of things because I had a lot of good mentors and leaders to learn from. And that's why I say, leadership, A, it's a 24/7 job, but B, leadership is developed. You're not born a leader. Because when I look at myself, the way I lead today has been impacted by a number of people over this journey of 30 plus years. And when I reflect back on my first management job, I was horrible. I mean, I was not a good manager. And yet here I am today teaching people and helping people be a better leader because I've learned to be a better leader. And I do things today that I'm confident I didn't have any empathy or compassion back in 1983. I was fresh out of college, thought I knew the world, and I was going to go conquer it. But I've learned a lot along the way.
Yeah, of course you have, right? Because like the rest of us, you've experienced the mistakes, the failures, the setbacks, the humility. You had those crushing blows to your pride, and you said, "Hey, a lot of the messes I got myself into were because of my ego, and because instead of saying, hey, is this actually serving my objective? Is it just to feel good or to satisfy my own emotions?" And there's a better way of going about it. And so it's a great message here that we all go through these journeys of seeing what not to do, right? Examples from others, and then we kind of live our own mistakes. And then ideally, we're like, hey, I've seen the good and the bad. What are the things I've done right in life, and what are those good mentors, role models that I can learn from? And you mentioned a little bit there about like you've accomplished many things, and this is your show, right? You're my current hero for the next 10 minutes or so, And so what sort of accomplishments do you have to humble brag about just, what's possible, what you've accomplished, what we can learn from you?
Well, most recently, before we were acquired a year ago, I joined a company in 2019 and actually tripled the size of the company in 3.5 years. So we went from having a client base of about 22 clients to a client base in excess of 70. And so transforming that organization and transforming the sales effort from selling 10 to 12 clients a year versus one or none, which they had experienced prior, is a pretty tough accomplishment to come by. So I'm pretty proud of that one. I've had others in my career where I've had acquisitions that I've done on behalf of other organizations. The first acquisition I ever worked on was an offshore acquisition when I worked for a technology company back in 2002. And I've worked on probably 8 acquisitions since then, if not more than that. So again, it's a learning process, and you have to be open to always willing to learn new things and also be able to give back to those that you're helping.
And what's the secret? Like you say, it's important to learn and to give back. And I imagine it's always good to like develop your people. But say you come across one of these organizations where the sales effort is hit or miss, the hit or miss, the growth is just barely hanging on. Like, what's your approach? Do you look at the low hanging fruit? Do you look at other businesses? Like, how do you kind of revitalize a struggling business?
So one of the things that I like to do is I like to look at what we do well and start with what we do well and can we do that better. If you focus on what we do well and the people don't have to change that much, then you're going to have an easier road when it gets to the difficult things that aren't working well. So I'll typically work on, first on looking at what can we improve that we do well today and make it even better, create followers and doers within the organization to help then lead the effort to do it on the harder things that are going to come. And that's what I've done a lot of in my career. It's once you've done it once or twice, you get the knack for finding the people that are going to follow you on that journey. And I think the integrity pillar is so important in that because when you set that standard, it's easy for people to follow because they know you're going to be consistent and they know that they can trust you.
That's a great multi-step strategy. It seems like you say, okay, well, what are our strengths? How do we do more of this? And you kind of find like an easy win. And then from that, you find the buy-in, right? You find who are your champions or who are the leaders within that maybe are the people on your side. And that's really, I think that's a great approach because when you're dealing with people, sometimes you deal with people that are all talk, right? Or that they're friendly to you and like that might be deceiving, but as far as like the people that actually get it done, take action, prove themselves to you, that's great. And then I imagine there's then the momentum, like you said, of like getting to those tougher problems. You say, hey, well, sure, there's other stuff to do, but like look at what we already accomplished in mission number 1. Now in mission number 2 and 3, like we can imagine what we can do now.
Right. We become unstoppable. And the
Yeah.
sky's the limit, right? And that's when the fun stuff really starts to happen and people see the transformation taking place and they get on board and they ride that train and they see how far that they can ride it. So it's been a fun ride for me. I've enjoyed everything that I've done in my career and I don't have any regrets. So this is kind of like my way of giving back to those that helped me along the way.
Well, that's great to hear. And as you know very well, I'm sure the this whole thing of like problem solving and leadership and entrepreneurship, it's not always easy. It's probably almost never easy, right? And it's not all fun. And there's lots of failures, but it is an adventure, especially when you come on a podcast and you say, "Hey, I've had all these ups and downs." That's what we like to hear about. And so, in that spirit, I love the struggle stories, right? I love when you look back and you say, "Man, I was in such a panic. I didn't know what to do next. I was at the end of my rope." But then looking back now, you kind of laugh in hindsight and having that perspective. So, do you have a struggle story of some kind to share with us just to let us know what's possible if we persevere and figure it out?
I have one that kind of closely illustrates that, and it's a story about empathy. I was running a segment of a technology company, and I had a group of, in one department, 25 people. This was back in the late 90s timeframe. You remember green screen technology?
Oh yeah,
Where your
I mean,
computer, when your
right
computer
behind
didn't,
me.
yeah, where your computer didn't even have a mouse. So I was charged with this department, and I had the distinct pleasure of having to tell them that their jobs were going to be eliminated, that we were sunsetting that product. And I had a few days to get my thoughts together. And I kept wrestling with, how am I going to do it in such a way that they don't just run out the door? Because we needed them to stay so that we could transition those clients off of that technology onto newer technology. And so I really wrestled with it, and I came up with three things. And when I met with them as a group, I made them three promises. The first promise I made to them is that I would give them as much notice as was feasibly possible as to when I thought their position would be eliminated. So that meant I had to understand how many clients were going to transition and implement the new technology, when was that going to happen, and were there any surprises, like somebody decides to terminate and go to another vendor. And we did have that happen. But in order to give them enough time to look for something else. So the first promise was I'd give them as much time and as much notice as I could feasibly give them. The second promise I made to them is that if anyone wanted to learn the new technology and the new products and services we were introducing, I would allow them time during the workday to learn the technology, learn the skills they needed to be able to transition to support those new products and services. The third promise I made to them is, if you don't want to stay in your current role, but want to stay with the organization, I will personally help you find a new job within the organization. If
Ooh.
you decide you don't want to stay with the organization, I will personally help you look outside of the organization for a job that's suitable for you. I made those three promises. All I was expecting was to minimize the number of people who would have left before I needed them to exit that position. I achieved that. I absolutely achieved that. Nobody left before their job actually was going away. Here's what happened that I didn't expect. For the next 3 years, that department, as it continued to shrink, had the highest employee satisfaction ratings in the entire company. This company was 15 to 20,000 people. And this small team had the highest satisfaction rating. I never expected that to occur. But what happened was, I realized I told them what I would have wanted to hear from my boss. A, you got my back. My kids aren't going to go hungry because you're going to give me as much notice as possible. Two, you're going to help retrain me into new roles if I want to stay with the organization. And if I decide not to, you're going to help me on the outside get a job. Who does that? Well, I did that. And so the net result was, some of these 25 people still communicate with me today, some 20 years plus years later. And so that's something that I was really deathly afraid of and couldn't figure out for a few days how I was going to approach it, until I really sat down and said, what would I want to hear? What would I want to do? But that whole situation could have gone very, very poorly, but it didn't.
And I think we've all been in that situation when we're dealing with a bad manager or someone that just doesn't communicate. And then we end up filling in the gaps with our own imagination, which is sometimes bad, right? Sometimes causes us to make those rash decisions, and there's gossip. Next thing you know, everyone's quitting all at once. That's the opposite of what you want. And so I love your problem solving here. You said, well, what would I want to hear? They call that empathy. And then you like broke down the problem and said, well, like there's different types of people, but maybe they fit into one of these three buckets, or maybe even all three. And I can make these promises and just, like you said, minimize the damage, or even turn a bad into a good, and retrain your people and say, promise I'll communicate, and even help them find a better fit inside or outside the company if it comes to that. That's great to hear. And so, we're here to promote you, Mr. Jim. We're here to promote this book, The Six Pillars of Effective Leadership, and to talk you up and your experiences. But right before we do that, I want to make sure that we fill in the gaps, so to speak. So in this conversation we're having here about leadership, business, problem solving, people, all these kind of subtopics, is there a missing hidden question in our conversation that I should be asking you? I just don't know what to ask you.
Let me think. I think the question would be, I'm going blank at the second. I know what I want to say, but I don't know how it should be said. I think the question should be, Jim, of your six pillars, the one that strikes me as being odd is humor. Why humor? And I think that would be the question. And when I say a leader needs to show humor, I don't mean be a stand-up comedian. I use humor in certain situations. For example, if I see a group of employees in conflict and arguing and not being able to get to the end of the task or the end of the job, I'll use humor to get involved into the discussion. I'll use humor to kick off a meeting to level set everybody to get them relaxed for what we're going to talk about. I'll use humor in other times, again, to diffuse a situation if I see it getting out of control, or to bring people back to what the agenda was if we went down a sidetrack. So I think that the one question would be, why is humor important? And I think it's important today, especially because of how tense everybody is. The world around us today is not a happy place. And the one thing for sure is, if you're not happy where you're working and you're not enjoying what you're doing, get out. Find somewhere else to go that you can enjoy, again, life, and not have this burden of the office or work hovering over you. And so I think the question again would be, why humor? And I think, again, to my answer, I think humor has a place in the workplace, but it's not a 24/7 place. You're not telling jokes all day.
Right. Yeah, and that's a whole other problem, right? If you're never serious, but it is good for a pattern interrupt, it seems, and to show your flexibility and to show how you're dynamic, and just to kind of, sometimes it is necessary to make light of a situation that's too serious, or just to make things less boring and more exciting. And so I'm looking at this table of contents here of the six pillars of effective leadership. We're looking at integrity, focus, compassion, stability, empathy, and then, of course, humor. And these are interesting and helpful tools in the toolbox. And to get us excited about how this is a book that stands out compared to a lot of other leadership stuff, right? You mentioned humor. Why should someone check out the six pillars of effective leadership right now?
I think it's a perfect time. If you're a leader today, or you're somebody who wants to be a leader, this book can actually give you a roadmap. There's three things in each chapter. There's typically a story about that particular characteristic. There's also, a definition of what it is. There's also suggested exercises that you could do to help learn that pillar and put it into your own life. And the next thing that's in each chapter is a reference to someone other than me that uses that pillar in their management style. So, for example, when you look at stability, I think of Warren Buffett, and I have him cited in my book as one who shows constant stability. He's been doing the same thing the same way for decades. So people around him have caught on with that infectious spirit and have followed him because they know there's going to be consistency and stability in every acquisition they're going to go about and do. And so someone who wants to learn more can then go back and look up Warren Buffett, find out more things about him. And in many chapters, there's more than one person referenced in terms of who they could look up in the business world. So I think the book stands on its own as being a little bit different, because I'm not proliferating or pontificating my own just beliefs, but also giving real world examples of people who use that in their management style.
That's wonderful. You thought this through, and I love your thought process. You think of how many like formula TV shows are out there, right? How many Law and Orders, how many acronyms, and they all kind of have a set structure that says, well, the beginning of the episode we'll do this, and then we'll have that, and at the end, the murderer will always confesses to the crime for some reason. Like you have this kind of set thing, but then within the bones of that there's the unexpectedness, the creativity. And so, but so you kind of have that combination of the expectedness, but also the, oh, well, which hero will Jim emphasize for focus or for compassion? What would the exercise be? You have like a good blend in that, and the end result is something that helps us and perhaps tells us, well, if maybe in the chapter about empathy, I can say, oh, well, there's this other technique. Maybe I can look more into that. It gives you a nice sampling, but you can also go deep if you want. And speaking of next steps and speaking of learning more, we have this amazing website. It's jimcarlough.com. That's JIMCARLOUGH.com, where we find out all about you and your speaking and your podcast and reasons to hire you. And so, as far as someone jumping into some next steps here, Mr. Jim, checking out your book, which is called The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, and checking out your website, what are some logical next steps?
I think some logical next steps. One of the things that I very much heavily believe in is mentoring. And I believe every leader should have a mentor. And that mentor is not your manager or your leader at work. It's somebody external to the work environment. I've worked for organizations where we've had very formal mentoring programs, and they're amazing. So I recommend to all leaders to have a mentor, at least one. I have 2 to 3 people that I often call upon when I'm struggling trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And I would say if people are new to the mentoring concept and they want to learn more, just reach out to me. I'd be glad to talk you through it. And if you're having trouble finding a mentor, I'll help you with that as well. I mentor today 5 or 6 people and have consistently for 25 years. But I truly believe in it. And it's one way to learn and also develop your own leadership style faster and get the input of others when you're struggling to get an answer.
That's great advice. So we need a mentor, and they should be outside of that usual work hierarchy. That way they have the objectiveness and they have that perspective. And that's great advice. And so, as far as you say, someone contacting you, do you recommend they contact you through the website, or like what's a good way to do that?
Actually, the easiest way is through the website. You can send, there's an email form on the website that'll go directly to my inbox. That's one way. My phone number's obviously there, but days are very, very busy. And I know people don't like to leave voicemail messages. So I think email is probably the best way to reach out. And then we can schedule in email communication, schedule time to talk. And I'll be glad to help them with whatever they're struggling with.
Very great, very nice, and I'm impressed with the generosity of your time here, Jim. But you and I both know that you can blast this offer, and so few people take you up on that, right? People they'll watch the YouTubes, they'll watch the podcast, they'll go on social media, but as far as like even just sending a quick message, it's like there's such a thin herd, if that's even a way to put it. But there's like just such a small number of people that actually say, hey, I need help, and I heard Jim on this podcast, and I want to reach out and just get a second brain on the problem. I don't know how to move forward with my own life, career, business. I need someone else to just give me an opinion, advice, and discuss the problem. And so Mr. Jim's being generous with his time about, you go to that website, jimcarlough.com. Again, that last name is CARLOUGH. So jimcarlough.com. You click on that contact me button. You send then the message to Jim, say, I heard you on the podcast. I want to discuss my situation, and just get that dialogue started, because Mr. Jim Carlough is someone who transforms aspiring leaders into visionary trailblazers. And in his very amazing book we've been discussing, The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, he unveils these 6 essential attributes to master intentional leadership, which empowers you to inspire, lead, and drive meaningful change in any organization. And so, as we reflect on what we discussed here, Jim, people check out the book, people check out the website, jimcarlough.com. It's time for the scary part of the show, where I try to stump you, I try to put you on the spot by asking for a fun or interesting quote or lesson that has served you in life or in business. So, what comes to mind as far as a fun quote or lesson?
So there is a quote from Ray Kroc. So for those who know the name, he's the founder of McDonald's, and he talks about the quality of leader in a quote, and it goes, "The quality of a leader is reflected in the standards that they set for themselves."
Ooh,
And again, that's to me a very strong statement that one would have to live up to. And that's one that I profess. And that's a quote that I found a number of years ago, but I've kept it with me just to remind myself that I have to set the standard, and that standard is going to be high.
yes, I love it. Set the standard, make it a high standard, and that change begins with you. So we'll think about that as we check out that book, which once again on Amazon, look for The Six Pillars of Effective Leadership by Mr. Jim Carlough, Carlough. I make sure to spell that because that's a difficult one if you don't know exactly how to say it. And then jimcarlough.com, where you can jump around and check out about more about his book and his speaking and the podcast. But most importantly, Mr. Jim wants you to go to that contact form and start the conversation. Say, I heard you on Robert Plank's Marketer of the Day podcast. I love what you had to say, Mr. Jim. My problem is this, and we'll get that conversation started. So thanks for being here, Mr. Jim, and telling us about your book, your adventures, your travels, many more decades and adventures to come, and many more people to help. So I thank you very much for being here and helping us out.
Robert, I thank you for having me. This has been a blast, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Let's do it. Count on it. We'll get it scheduled again sometime soon.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right.